How can we use tabletop games to improve education? Welcome to Gaining Advantage. Welcome to Gaining Advantage. We are using tabletop games like Dungeons & Dragons to help you make lives better. We have some really huge news. This isn't quite out yet. We've got some finishing touches on it, talking to my team that is looking at it and making sure everything is just right. But we are changing history, and this should be ready within about a week of this launching, hopefully less than that. This year, as Dungeons & Dragons celebrates its 50th year, and thus also 50 years of tabletop role-playing games, in that entire time, I've looked and I have not been able to find a single role-playing game, book, rule set, anything that has been produced in Braille in 50 years. No more. We are spearheading that to change the industry, and we're starting out by making the system reference document for Dungeons & Dragons 5th edition, or just simply 5e, available in Braille for free. All right. For those not familiar, the system reference document is pretty similar, not exactly, but close enough to what you may know as the basic rules. It's kind of an abridged version of the player's handbook, the monster manual, a little bit from the Dungeon Master's Guide. It's a set of character classes, spells, magic items, and monsters, and the core rules of 5th edition. All right. We've converted that all to Braille. I've got a team of Braille users that are looking it over to make sure that all the formatting is done accurately and the way it needs to be. And as soon as I get the go-ahead from them, we will have it available for free on DriveThruRPG. And I'm so excited about this because, number one, this is the first time in Dungeons & Dragons history, in tabletop role-playing game history, that the Braille has been available. We had Braille dice, which are awesome, and I'm so thankful to groups like thought-provoking for making those available, but not rule sets. And so we finally will have that available. We at Wyrmworks Publishing are in the process of converting all of our published content to Braille, and are committed to every release going forward will have a Braille version included with the release. Now, this is digital Braille, and as we launch this, we are also including tutorial videos so that other publishers can get their stuff converted too. It's actually really easy. There's some fantastic free software out there that that's multi-platform. I'm using a Mac. If you're using Windows, Linux, it's available for your system, whatever you're using, so that you can convert it. So that this will just make the entire industry more accessible and more welcoming to people with print disabilities. And so that is going to be available very soon. Just go to our website, wyrmworkspublishing.com, for a link, or look us up. Just search on DriveThruRPG for Braille, because you're not going to find a whole lot else on there with that keyword, and you'll find it. And so I'm super excited about this, and I hope that you are too. Even if you are not a Braille user, I hope that you recognize the fantastic potential that this has. Just in raising awareness of the needs of the industry. I also have a few other publishers that I've worked with to convert some of their stuff to Braille, and we're even going to be launching a bundle that includes the stuff that we've converted to Braille for them. Not everything is Braille in that bundle, because some of it, it's going to take some more work to make those conversions, and it's just not ready for that yet. But we want to make this available, and this is just in so many ways, it's a huge step, but it's going to make a huge difference in just helping people to understand what the various needs are so that everyone can play games with us. And so we want to just make that as easy as possible. Now, if you haven't yet, speaking of launches, we are getting ready to launch our Ready to Roll Bayweather Friends adventure. That is going to be only $1, and you can find a link in the show notes to follow it on Kickstarter so that you get notified when it launches. That's going to have Braille too, because we're committed to making that available, which means that it will be the first ever tabletop role-playing game Kickstarter launch that includes Braille at launch. And so we also include audio and EPUB and other formats so that to make it as widely accessible as possible. Now, if you're wondering about physical Braille, we're working on that. It is something that we're working on and that we are hoping soon, within the next couple of years probably, as we work out all the logistical details of making physical Braille books also widespread, available through the industry. We've got some obstacles to overcome, but we've got ideas how to overcome them, and it's just a matter of only so many hours in the day to work on it, and so we're working on that. And so now, with all of that, go grab those, pause it right now, go get those links and those products, and or follow us on, subscribe to the Dragon's Horde, our weekly email, and watch for those announcements there. And let's get on with our interview. Today we have Dr. Dave Eng, an expert in using games for education. Dave's passion lies in using games for education and learning, with his expertise in applied games and commitment to community development. Dave brings a unique perspective to our discussion on the power of gaming in education. Welcome, Dave.
Thank you, Dale, for having me. I appreciate it.
So what would you like us to know about you personally, specifically speaking to the tabletop gaming crowd?
Sure. So the way I like to identify myself as an intellectual person who's also a creative. I'm also an educator. I design games. I also design learning content and instructional design. I'm also a researcher focusing on games, theory, and technology, and kind of the intersection between all of those. When it comes to tabletop gaming, the one thing I want everyone to know is that if given the choice, first choice is blue. If I don't have blue, next choice is yellow. If not yellow, next choice is green. And just a fun fact about myself, and we can get into this later if you're still interested. Whenever I am in a icebreaker scenario and I have to share a fun fact about myself, I usually tell people I have been seasick in every time zone in the planet.
Well, I haven't traveled that much, but otherwise I can completely resonate with that.
Nice.
So tell us about your work in gaming and education.
Sure. So I am what you would say like a lifelong gamer. I've been playing games for most of my life, a lot of different mediums too. So tabletop games, video games, computer games, mobile games, card games, everything else like that. Way back when I was working in higher education administration, I had a goal to become an executive administrator in higher ed, kind of like a dean of students or a vice president. Mm-hmm. And in order to do that, my boss at the time said I would have to get a terminal degree. I have to get a doctorate and go back to graduate school. And I knew that getting a doctorate, I would have to write an original piece of research. And my advisor at the time told me that you're free to choose mostly any topic that you want for your research. However, just know that whatever topic you choose, you're going to have to be reading a lot about it, tens of thousands of words, and just consuming a lot of content over the next few years. So I said, okay, I want to do gaming, but I want to do gaming in a way that I could apply it for like education or something. And I didn't really know about games-based learning or using like games for teaching and learning before. I kind of knew a little bit about it, but I didn't know there was this entire field. So afterwards, I had finished my graduate work in applied games. At the time, I was calling it a dissertation in games-based learning. I had multiple different options I could do. One of the things I didn't want to do was start a career as exclusively as an academic, so publishing in academic journals, because I didn't really find it very fun or lucrative. So what I did do was start universityxp.com, which is where I continue to write about using games for teaching and learning. And I like it because it's a platform that allows me to just write whatever I want, whenever I want, and share it out with the community. Sometimes the writing resonates with the community, sometimes it doesn't, but I like the platform because it's free in order to do so.
Sure. Yeah, absolutely. It's really something to be said for being able to make those choices for yourself and write about things that are interesting. And if it, because chances are, if it interests you, it's going to interest other people as well. Yeah. So give us some examples of how that works.
So when I originally went back to graduate school, I was working at a small liberal arts college at the time called St. Thomas Aquinas College. And in that role, I was also the director of student activities. So I was going to school full time and also working full time. And I was exploring this whole realm of using games for teaching and learning. And I supervised several different staffs of students. So one of them was an orientation team. So these were the students that welcomed potential new freshmen on campus at in the summer preceding the start of their college career. So I wanted to know, could I use tabletop games for teaching and learning in various different capacities? And this is kind of what informed my whole doctoral study. So what I chose a certain slew of games from my own collection to use for this. I had my students play these games, and then I interviewed them afterwards to try to determine if there were any connection made to the specific learning outcomes I had for them. So the games that we played over the entire course of the study, and some of them that I played with my student staff at the time, were Codenames, Hanabi, King of Tokyo, Coup, Reformation, Flashpoint, Fire Resistance, or Fire Rescue, and the Resistance Avalon. And all of them had a lot of different outcomes. I think that I started out at the very beginning before the study with like Pandemic, but also used games like Magic Maze, or focusing on cooperative games. And they all kind of had varying degrees of success, depending on what I was trying to communicate or what the specific learning outcome was. Sometimes teams worked better together, sometimes they didn't. But really, I think the critical aspect here is focusing on the game as an activity that meets those specific outcomes rather than just the game to play the game. And I've kind of developed and refined my approach since then.
Okay, so I mean, obviously, with playing games, you're going to get more engagement usually than, like, say, a lecture. Right? So, what other benefits do you find from that format of teaching, as opposed to, say, like small group discussion or something like that?
It's a good question, and something that a lot of other people have asked me in the past. And I'd say that games are a form of experiential learning. And experiential learning is really part of this cycle where individuals will experience some sort of activity or some sort of event, or really any sort of activity. And then they review that activity, incorporate some of their own conclusions from that activity, and then experiment again or experience again. And that's really kind of informed my whole philosophy of learning, which I define as learning is the transformation of experience into knowledge. So what I've told other people is that you can use other forms of instruction. Like you brought up some good points there. Like, why not just use reading, or why not just use discussions, or like essays or writing or anything else like that? Because a lot of other classes do that right now. But what I really like about games is that it's something that needs to be participated in actively. So for most of these games, and for most games overall, I would say that it's not a game that you can participate in passively. There has to be some sort of level of interaction. Two, I think that in order to get better at games and in order to meet the specific outcome that you've set out as a player, you need to try different things. You need to experiment. And then three, I think games as an activity are important because, especially when I've used them for learning in the past, I've told students, I don't really care whether or not you win or lose at this game, or win or lose against other players. What I really care about is that you take part in this activity, you give it your best, because afterwards we're going to talk about it. And I think that this process called debriefing after the game is really important, because it allows players to reflect on their experience playing the game and potentially reflect it back to whatever the specific outcomes we're looking for. So, in summary, I think that games are really great because you have to interact. You can't do so passively. Games provide that structure for interaction, and that debriefing process, the reflection process, is incredibly important, no matter what kind of learning you're doing.
Okay, so you talked about using kind of existing sort of off-the-shelf games, so I'm thinking about that, and I'm thinking about if you have specific educational goals for a class,
Mhm.
right? That where I can definitely see how for like a specific lesson,
Mhm.
a game may convey that information in a way that you can interact with it and really kind of process it and take it to heart.
Mhm.
But I sort of wonder, okay, does when I think about all the different things that a class has to cover over the course of say a semester,
Mhm.
um, you know, uh, do you find that you have to create your own games? Can you sort of build on existing games, or how does that work?
It's a fair question and something that I've gotten from other educators. And I think that when you first start exploring this whole field of games-based learning, gamification, serious games, applied games, etc., a lot of educators who may have like subject matter expertise in their particular discipline, they'll want to look for that game. And I call this the silver bullet approach. Like, I'm looking for a game that'll meet all of the specific learning outcomes for my, like modern history class that I'm teaching to high schoolers. That's exactly, like 16 weeks or so. And for the most part, and for most games, you're not going to be able to find a game that meets all of your specific learning outcomes for your specific student population for the amount of time that you're looking for. So one of the very first things I tell almost every educator is stop looking for a specific silver bullet, particularly if it's like a commercial off the shelf game, to meet all of the needs for your class, because it's most likely that you will not be able to find a game like that. Instead, what I tell educators is focus on one particular learning outcome for your class, or one particular unit, or even just one particular chapter, just one particular module, and start small. If there is a game or if there is anything available that is interactive that you can then adapt for your class to use to meet that specific outcome, that's a really good first step. I think looking for a game that meets all of those outcomes and all of your objectives is going to be incredibly difficult and hard to find, and you're kind of setting yourself up for a failure there. But if you can just get very, very granular and very, very specific on what you want to target, there are plenty of games that can meet those specific needs, and it's determined by you as an educator, what you're teaching, and specifically what's available right now. You can often adapt a game that's commercially available for your class, or if you'd like and you have the time and resources to do so, you can create a game from the ground up, which is a serious game.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, I have a hard time imagining a class where you're just playing Ticket to Ride for for a semester, and
Right.
this teaches you everything you need.
Yeah, it's hard to find a game that specifically meets that all those criteria. And again, like whenever it comes to those serious games, you're going to need to find well, one, be an expert in your subject matter, but two, also find individuals like me that have played a lot of different games that can recommend different avenues or options for you.
Sure.
Mhm.
So how do you deal with you have different people learn in different ways, and a
Mhm.
game's going to resonate with some students more than others.
Mhm.
How do you manage that?
One of the things I like to do, and I brought this up before, is I like to set expectations with the students ahead of time. So one of the earliest expectations I set with them is that we're going to play a game. This is part of the learning activity for this class or course or for this staff training. The expectation here is that you participate in the game wholeheartedly. I call this the magic circle promise, and that when we play games, we're in the magic circle. Everything that is in the magic circle matters for the playing of the game. Everything outside the magic circle does not count. So that when you're in the magic circle, I just want you to commit fully. However, there is an out of magic circle outcome, which is winning or losing the game. And that really doesn't matter. I just ask that people participate wholeheartedly, that participate in the game, because afterwards we're going to discuss the entire activity and we're going to take it from there. But depending on people's backgrounds and their experience, and I like to say game literacy, the different games that they played over time, some are more hesitant than others. Some are more active. Some are more passive than others. Some really don't really know how to interpret the situation. And I've kind of had students from all over the spectrum, from many different and diverse backgrounds that have fulfilled their roles in games to different success and abilities. And I think it just really relies on the experience of the educator to try to determine how to best use this game for their teaching and learning. And I will tell a lot of people who are listening right now that the first time you do it, it's probably not going to go completely according to plan. And I think you have to be okay with that. Like I talked about experiential learning before, it's about the cycle of playing the game, play testing it in your class, trying to get some feedback from that, and just kind of trying to iterate from there.
Right. So, do you have some examples of how that's been applied in different places? How people you've worked with, or anything like that?
Sure. So I'll bring up two examples. One of them is an older game at this point called Two Rooms and a Boom. Have you heard about that game before?
No, I'm not familiar with that one.
So Two Rooms and a Boom it was on Kickstarter a few years ago. It's I don't want to call it a social deduction game, but it's a highly social game, essentially where there are just large group of people and they're divided up into two quote unquote rooms, but they could potentially still exist in the same room. And there's like a lot of other social deduction games, there's a red team and there's a blue team. As the red team, you want a player whose secret identity is the president to be in the same room at the end of the game with another player whose secret identity is the bomber, because you want the bomb to go off and assassinate the president. And if you are on the blue team, you want the opposite. You want the bomber to be in one room and the president to be in the other room at the end of the game. So the entire game is played out with this and other different roles, and students and the participants have to just communicate with each other while keeping the roles private, who they want to send into the next room at the beginning of each phase. So I think there's 3 phases where you can do trades, and each trade has increasingly fewer and fewer students. And we played this in my public speaking class when we were covering influential speech, or any type of speech where you need to convince people to your specific point of view. And I told them, I gave them the same spiel at the beginning. We're going to be playing this game. You may not have heard about it before. This is how it's played. And again, I don't really care if you win or lose, but it's part of the activity, and we'll conduct the debriefing afterwards. And the debriefing that we talked about which was, like, what did you find were really effective means of convincing other people? Because in this game, they just get the objective and what they have to do, and that the role is secret, but they don't really know how to get it so that their team will win at the end of the game. And I got a lot of good feedback here. Some students really relied on their interpersonal relationships that they had built with each other before the game. Other students tried to take a more logical approach. And I said that all of these different approaches were legitimate. And one of the things I want you to talk about in a public speaking communications class is that speech is just one form of communication. And trying to convince people and trying to sway people towards your side of an argument is also another skill that I want to build in this class. And as we played the game, I wanted you to note that there's many different ways in which you can approach this. And I want you to keep that in mind. We left the game for a while. We covered some other class material, but we came back to play it later on in the term, and a lot of the students were able to apply a lot of the content we had covered in that class to that particular game. So I thought that was useful. So that's one example. And the other example I'm reading about right now in theory, but I have not used it in practice yet. It's a concept called matrix games. Have you heard of those, Dale?
Sounds familiar.
Okay. Well, matrix games are originally deployed for like military simulations and scenarios, but the entire premise, I think, is unique here in that many of the games that we play are specifically tabletop games are based on some sort of like mathematical outcome or calculation. Have the most number of points, bring the game to an end before this happens, etc. The entire premise of matrix games is, instead of using points to determine the winner or loser or standing of a player during a game, can you use words? So that was the entire premise. Can you use words instead of numbers to resolve the end of a game? And matrix games have been usually used again for military scenarios, but the whole premise is that individual actors will represent different like nation states during like a scenario. This is when it's used in a military simulation. And then one, party, like say like a attacking army or defending army, will propose a particular course of action. Like they want to rally troops within their country, they want to invade a neighboring territory, they want to rally their own population, etc. And then it's up to all of the players in the game, not just the actor, the one that's taking the active turn right now. All of the players in the game then hear the argument from the active player why this particular action would be even feasible or would occur in the actual scenario. And people make pros and cons arguments. And if you have a really strong pro argument and someone has a really strong, or if you have a really strong pro argument, but there are 3 really strong con arguments against the action you want to take, well, then when it actually comes to resolving whether or not this takes place, you're going to roll some dice in this case, and the pros and the cons act as modifiers. So you would have a +1 positive modifier and a -3 modifier to this action failing. And I think this is a really unique approach because you don't have to use this for military simulations. You can use this for any sort of simulation, but the crux of the argument here is really based on the fact that you're using words primarily as the way to resolve a particular game action rather than points, which I think is a really interesting and novel approach to this.
That's fantastic. I mean, I just both of these examples. I think about so often with the high school, college courses, and that you have like your final essay, and so much of that is just for one, it's sort of okay. Well, really, an essay is usually, in my experience at least, just sort of regurgitating a handful of points and putting it together in a cohesive series of paragraphs. But really it comes down to make sure you hit all of the points that you're supposed to hit. And so it's a recall exercise. And any sort of application that you use beyond that ends up being pretty theoretical. And so it's like, well, okay, that sounds good on paper, but how does that actually play out? And so when you have any kind of a simulation where you're actually implementing it and playing it out, you're going to learn a lot more about it. You're going to have a chance to look at it, at least in the simulated experience, how does it actually work? And you're going to take those memories with you. I've sat through a lot more hours of lectures than I have hours of playing, say, role-playing games. And I can tell you a lot more about the role-playing games that I've played than the lectures that I've sat through.
Right. And it's because role-playing games, again, it's a game. It's something that you have to actively participate in, whereas lectures you can, passively consume. It's like consuming a lot of other media, like, podcasts or videos or anything else like that.
Yeah. No, absolutely. Yeah, that's I just love it. And I have a lot of friends who are teachers, family members and things that have looked for ways to use games, gamification, and all of that in their teaching, and just found it to be incredibly effective. I mean, it just even in teaching that I've done, having the students act out a narrative. Where even it's like it's a written narrative, I'm just reading the story, and each of you plays a role. You just act out whatever you hear, and that they remember so much better. But even that is like it's active, but it's not interactive as much because you're still just sort of following orders,
right?
And whereas with a game, you're also making decisions. So you really have to process this information in order to make a decision about what comes next, or how do you respond to whatever happens to be going on. Yeah. All right. Other ways that you've seen this applied, or other questions that people ask you
about using games for teaching and learning?
Yeah.
Really, Dale, you asked I think some of the most common ones. So I'm glad that people are asking these questions, how to use games for teaching and learning. But it's worth it to start small and start with games that you are familiar with, and then try to connect it to what you ultimately want your learners to achieve.
Is there anything that you've discovered through your research or through applying your research that surprised you?
I'd say that it is that not everyone has the same level of gaming literacy that you may expect. And it's because, like, for me, I run in a lot of circles where we're different people playing a lot of different games over a course of time, so that we're very familiar with the vernacular, how certain games work, specific mechanics, dynamics, etc. But other people, even if they do game a lot, may be gaming on a different platform, so console games, PC games, mobile games, or anything else like that. So they may have a very different interpretation for how games operate, how they function, and how they should interact with it. And that's one of the things that surprised me, is that there's a very, very wide variety of game literacy out there, from the very high literate ones to have played many different games in many different formats and modalities, to those that just exclusively focus on one type of game, to those that really just haven't played any games at all. So I remember one particular time I had to explain like the actual mechanics behind tic-tac-toe, because the student had just never played tic-tac-toe, and then realized that like on a grid, that once you make a mark in one of those 9 spaces, that space is eliminated, and there's strategy involved in where you want to place your next mark. So I take a lot of those things for granted because I played a lot of different games, and I don't think other people should take that for granted either.
Wow. Yeah, no, that's a really great point.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So you have just rescued a genie from the hands of an Ifriti, and it offers you 3 wishes to achieve your goals to make the world better. What do you wish for?
So this is a really interesting question, Dale. I'm glad that you shared this with me ahead of time, because I had to come up with a good response. But my first one would be, I really wish everyone knew the difference between data, information, knowledge, and wisdom, because I feel like a lot of people conflate the fact that when they get good data, that's something that can be applied. If they have knowledge, it's immediate. It's something that works in all different contexts, which is different from wisdom, which is a combination of data and information and knowledge that is filtered through the bias of our own experiences and interactions. And me, as someone who works in all 4 of those different things at different times, kind of knows the difference, in that you may have really good data, but it doesn't have a lot of context, and you need to apply context to get information. But just because you have information does not mean it's going to be incredibly useful. That can be knowledge. Just because you have knowledge does not mean you're going to be have a lot of wisdom in all circumstances. So I think knowing the difference between those helps in a lot of different disciplines and avenues when it comes to just teaching, writing, education, and everything else like that. My second wish was, I really hope everyone has access to at least one like motivating experiential moment in their life. And like I said this at the top of the show, Dale, I think that all learning is the transformation of experience into knowledge. And I feel that when people have access to that type of experiential activity, I think it can really change their lives. And that's something that I wish for everyone. And then the last one, and this is something, I do some speaking engagements, but I always try to close on the same note, which I think really embodies my philosophy about using applied games. And I tell people, I challenge them, I say that after you've attended this particular presentation today, I challenge you to play well, play together, play critically, and also play in peace with one another.
Yeah, that's great. On your first point, it reminds me of when I was in 6th grade, and we were learning about the definition of technology. And I remember my teacher saying, it's tools and the knowledge how to use it. And I thought about that, and I thought, there is no part of that definition that has the wisdom of how to use it. And especially just with the rate that technology is advancing nowadays, that it's really hard to keep up with. Okay, what are wise uses of this technology? Like, the technology is not good or bad, it's just a tool, but how can we use it in a way that's beneficial? And I think it's something that we really struggle with as a global culture nowadays. So yeah, absolutely. All right. So what one message would you like to give educators who are interested in using gaming?
I talked a little bit about it before, but it's okay to start small. You don't need to try to gamify your entire course. You don't need to find one game that meets all your specific learning outcomes. So it's entirely okay to just gamify or apply a game for one particular module, one particular week of your course, and start there. See how it works. Will students adapt to it? Will they like it? And will it specifically meet your outcomes? And then I guess it's related to that point. You don't really know what you want to apply unless you experience a lot of different games. So we talked about gaming literacy. I would just say play a lot of different games. Like, I've never gone LARPing before, but if you have the opportunity to do so, I would do that because I've never participated in it. in it. I played tabletop games, console games, mobile games. I played mega games. I've instituted a mega or coordinated a mega game before. I'd never participated in that. So I would just tell people before you start applying games for teaching and learning, start small, but also increase your gaming vocabulary and gaming literacy by playing many different types of games.
All right. So what one message would you like to give gamers who want to see more gaming opportunities in their school or community?
So I would tell people to share your passion by inviting them to do what you do. I think that most of the successful initiatives I've seen with other educators using games is to take advantage of any already organized like club or organization that are playing games on a regular basis. If that doesn't exist, I recommend starting one. I also run a nonprofit called Banditos Gaming. We're a local tabletop gaming group that games for purpose. So we donate the majority of our revenue to other game-based nonprofits. And one of the things that we really focus on is that we will always have gaming on a regular basis. So you always know where to find us on Wednesdays at a particular date at a particular time. And if you're going to get gaming momentum going in your community, I highly recommend that people just work on their momentum, which is just having a regular time and place for people to meet, play games, connect, and engage with each other.
Cool. All right. So what projects are you working on that you can talk about?
One particular book I'm working on, and I'm going into my second year right now since I started it, is a book called 50 Games from 50 Lands. And my inspiration for it was to try to find games that didn't have a very popular following, mostly like tabletop games. And then just trying to do some research on them, actually go to the country that they originated from or currently has a current active player base, and kind of telling the story behind that game, because I feel like a lot of those games that have survived hundreds of years or sometimes millennia have a story about why they've persisted. So right now I'm conducting my research on many different games, hundreds of different games right now, to see which will make it into the book, because I'm trying to cover those 50 different games. But it's more of a labor of love than anything else, and I'm going to just continue working on it incrementally for as long as it takes.
Well, that sounds fantastic. Really ties in nicely with what you're talking about before about new experiences and perspectives and things that you can learn from it.
Right.
All right. And so we'll have all your contact information in our show notes, but where is the one best place that you'd like people to start to learn more about you or to contact you?
Sure. Good place to start is with my website. My website is davengdesign.com. That's DAVENG design.com.
So Dave, thanks so much for coming on the show. Everyone check out those links in the show notes.
Great. Thanks for having me, Dale. Appreciate it.
Hey, a huge thanks to Dave for coming on the show and for talking about his work. And he's so excited. I have so many friends and family members that are educators that are interested in new ways to bring to improve the way that they teach and to make their teaching more effective, more enjoyable, and all that. And I think that there's so much potential here. And so I really appreciate Dave for coming on. And you may notice that if you're a longtime viewer, that we are expanding our coverage on the show into other forms of gaming. We're not just talking about role-playing games. We're still mainly focused on role-playing games, but there's a lot of overlap. And I'll bet as you were listening to that interview, you may have thought, wow, a lot of these concepts of interaction and things like that, they're going to apply to any kind of game. And so I hope you recognize how easy it is to apply these concepts to role-playing games, even when we're talking about board games or some other kind of game. If you haven't figured out it already, I like to dream big, right? But we're changing the world here, one throw of the dice after another. And while there is definitely a very critical voice inside my head trying to downplay this, I know for a fact that it's true. From one conversation after another with players, designers, publishers, and gaming marketplaces, we're making incremental steps to change the hobby as we know it to be more accessible and inclusive. And it's really hard not to get excited about that. And our patrons are on the front lines of this battle and making a huge difference. You patrons will be able to say, yeah, I was there. I was in the adventuring party that took down the big bad ableist guy that had plagued the tabletop role-playing game hobby for 50 years. On January 11th, when we and a few other publishers release Braille versions of our products, as I mentioned earlier, your sword, your axe, your encouragement made that happen. And in the years to come, every time you see a tabletop role-playing game product available in Braille, you can say, I did that. That exists because we made it happen. And we're adding more. We have in our Foundry packages narrative audio available for BTT. It never existed before. Now it does. And it's going to increase because we're pushing the industry. The bards are going to write songs about you. If you want in on that and you're not already supporting us on Patreon, then you can lend your sword for as little as $2 a month. At higher tiers, there's lots of different rewards available, but I encourage you to check out the Patreon link in the show notes and join the party. And thanks to our patrons, we also add community copies to our store every month for those who can't afford our products. And so if that's you, you can sign up for our weekly emails to get notified when they come available. This month alone, we added $515 worth of free copies in 1 month. And so there's plenty there if you would like one or more of the titles. And, in addition to, changing the world, patrons get access to all of our content in a modular format that we call the Layer, plus exclusive extras, including adventures, added Foundry BTT access to all of our content. The higher tiers have all kinds of added benefits like gifts and playing games with me. And so just check out the link in our show notes for more details. Now, if you see this show being helpful, please, if you're watching this on YouTube, hit the like button. If you'd like to see more, please subscribe wherever you happen to be finding this. And if you know people that need to hear this, please pass it on to them. And if you, like me, think everyone needs to hear this, then pass it on through your social media friends. And the biggest thing that you can do to help get the word out is to leave a rating, leave a comment, it's all that interaction that stimulates all of the algorithms to raise awareness. And so please help us get the word out so that more people can benefit from this. Thanks so much for joining us to make lives better with tabletop games.